Good morning. Welcome to Black Press Live. And today we have a very special program this morning with the president of the NAACP, none other than Derrick Johnson himself. Founded in 1909 in response to the ongoing violence against Black people around the country, the NAACP is the largest and most preeminent civil rights organization in the nation. They have over 2,200 units and branches across the nation, along with well over 2 million activists. Their mission is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons. Derrick Johnson, President Derrick Johnson, welcome to Black Press Live.
Thank you for having me, and good morning.
Good morning. And we also are going to be joined by the NNPA President and CEO, Dr. Ben Chavis, making this pretty historic, this broadcast, to have such civil rights icons on together. But we'll get started, and Dr. Chavis will join in. But President Johnson, obviously, you probably have been as busy as ever. We see the uprisings and the demonstrations in the wake of the George Floyd, the police killing of George Floyd. What's it been like the last couple of weeks for you and the NAACP?
Good. Extremely busy. We have units across the country who are participating in the demonstrations as an organization. Some of those demonstrations, we are the lead, others, we are the participants. But at all of those demonstrations, we are bringing the voice of the community to ensure that equal protection under the law is afforded to all citizens, and the rash of police abuse in our communities stop. This is a national problem. It requires a federal response, but local action must be in the streets. And we have seen that take place from Hawaii to Connecticut. And so it's been a busy time, but it's been a rewarding time to hear the voices of our people take to the streets.
Absolutely. And the NAACP has a strategic partnership with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the Black Press of America. President Johnson, how important is that relationship, as we just talked about with the situation with George Floyd and police reform and things of that nature?
So extremely important. We are a part of the Black institutional infrastructure, NNPA and NAACP, the National Baptist Convention. I can go on, AKA Omega Psi Phi. We are the Black institutional infrastructure, and but for our existence, many of our people would not have the ability to communicate, to come together and really advocate for the needs of our community. One of the people that I would idolize coming through college was Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. And I love in a part of his speech when he say, organize, organize, organize. Our people need to organize, whether it's in a Sunday school meeting or within one of our institutional partners. So we must be in alignment because we are all that we have. In order to ensure the outcomes that we deserve, we must work together to achieve them.
Yeah, absolutely. And President Johnson, you know that the newspapers in general, people have been proclaiming the death of newspapers for over a decade or even more. But again, the Black press has been around 193 years. NNPA has been representing the Black press for 80 years. Can you really talk to our publishers right now and explain to them from the NAACP's point of view the importance of our Black publishers?
But it's extremely important, without a doubt. But just like the NAACP, we have to evolve with the times. Technology is causing many challenges. There are tons of civil rights organizations that no longer exist. Some of that is because as the times evolve, we must also evolve. And I think that's the challenge and opportunity for the Black press and for publishers across the country. We must seize upon the evolution of how people receive, get their information, making sure that we are plugged into to that. For the NAACP, for example, I clearly recognize that the median age of African Americans is mid-30s. So some of the things we've done in the past, I have to cease doing them and then transition over and ways in which our community can hear us, that medium age of that mid-30s. So we've had to invest heavily in our social media platforms. We had to grow out our outreach of our youth activists in ways in which we empower them by creating a pipeline called Next Gen, so we can evolve over time. And I think that is the same challenge and opportunity that publishers across NNPA community will also have to confront. So I don't know if it's as much as proclaiming the death of papers. It is a call to the reality that evolution is catching up, and either we get caught by it or we get in front of it.
Yeah, and joining us now is our president and CEO, Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Dr. Chavis, welcome.
Well, thank you. And greetings to Derrick Johnson, President Derrick Johnson. I've known Brother Johnson for decades. I appreciate his leadership, his commitment. And of course, I want all of our publishers around the United States and all of our listeners around the United States to know that we need the NAACP today more than ever before. And certainly, I just want to reaffirm the strategic alliance between the NNPA and the NAACP. And I've listened very carefully to President Johnson's opening remarks, and we concur. And the good news is, President Johnson, the NNPA, we are innovating. We now have the largest Black-owned digital network in America. So we're still printing, but we're also in the social media space. We're in the digital space. Our publications are also online. And, you know, from now posting news on a weekly basis, we post news on an everyday basis, actually on an hourly basis, 24/7. So, and of course, the whole world is watching America right now, America's racial divide, not only between the COVID-19 disproportionality, but also these police brutality cases, these fatal interactions between Black folks and the police has caught the attention not only of all Americans, but people all over the world. So NAACP is our leading, our historic, and our contemporary civil rights organization. And we want to continue to close ranks, work together, make impact. And I like winning victories. I remember when we marched together in Mississippi years ago to try to save HBCUs. So Derrick, is glad to see you. Mr. President, is glad to see you always on the front line.
Good. Listen, Dr. Chavis, Derrick is fine, and absolutely. It was one of those turning moments for me as a student at Tougaloo College, and we were protesting and marching to preserve the Jackson State Alcorn and Valley, where they were trying to close, merge, and consolidate.
Yes.
And
yes.
as a result of the case, it would have impacted HBCUs in 14 states. And quite frankly, that was an evolutionary period for us as an organization and for the community. Because prior to Dr. Chavis stepping in the seat, we got resistance from the national office, question whether or not we should be doing it. Our state president, Dr. Henry, was in complete support, in fact, funded much of it.
That's
but we
right.
didn't get that support from the national office until Dr. Chavis walked into the office. And that's part of one of those evolutionary realities that we had to turn the corner. That generationally, the leadership of the NAACP went to the next generation. That was Dr. Chavis. Generationally, the young people and the energy was in the street was what I was a part of, and I understood clearly at that moment that we are a part of a continuum of movement builders. That there is no one personality that ignite movements and carry movements. It's the institutions that we belong to, and how we as individuals get inside of those institutions and help push the institutions to keep up with where our people are. Because times change, therefore we must evolve. And in that evolution, we must be as innovative as we were when we were founded.
Absolutely. President Johnson, right now, the chant Black Lives Matter, the call for Black Lives Matter, the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and many people are saying, not just in the Black community, but in the white community and Latino, all communities, that maybe we have to know for sure that the United States now is at a tipping point, a turning point, where this moment in history can become a movement. And you and I come out of the movement, we know that what sustains a movement is more than just the chant. What sustains a movement is not only the activism and involvement of everybody in our communities, but also we have to have that undergirding, that financial undergirding, that economic undergirding as we move towards social change. So I would like for you to forecast from an NAACP perspective, how do you see this movement building? It's still part of the civil rights movement. You're right, evolve. Sometimes people think they have to reinvent the wheel. Well, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've learned the lessons for the past. We don't have to live in the past, but we should take those lessons and push forward. What is your prognosis of the current movement for racial justice, social justice, and civil rights as people are marching in the streets of America today?
So I think we're at a critical juncture of opportunity, but that opportunity can only be realized whether or not we're focused on how to get there. We have to move people from protest to power, from power to policy implementation, to really address the systemic and structural racism that we have been plagued with in this nation for decades and centuries. And that's really key. And how you get there is less about proclamations and slogans, it's more about strategic navigation. If we look at what the protest currently, the profile of the protesters, it looked more like America as opposed to just Black America. You have white, you have Black, you have young, old, female, male. You have a unique set of circumstances that we have not seen ever in history around issues that are squarely Black issues, not issues that impact the Black community, but squarely Black issues, aggressive policing in our community and the value of Black lives, squarely around structural racism. We have never seen this before. The real question and opportunity for us is, can we take this energy and make the next major march to the polls in November, where we can get policymakers in the seats and who will bring the value proposition that we are seeing in that statement, that a Black life matter, and that policymaker take the seat, and then we have in front of that policymaker, whether it's local, state, or federal, an agenda that qualifies that our lives matter, and that agenda is implemented in policy. And the value of a policy is in the budget, not the words.
Right.
It's in the budget. And that's where
Yep.
you hear so many people talking about defund police. It's not that we don't want police or law enforcement agents in our community. We want our people to be protected. We want our elders to feel safe when they roam in their neighborhoods, because that's their investment. We want our young people to have a prosperous future and the disadvantaged protected. We want to be able to pick up the phone and call if there's a domestic violence, but we don't want the police budget to be so bloated that you take away from the mental health budget. We don't want the police budget to be so out of whack and out of line with the values that we need in our community that you have no preventive support for our young people to participate in, that those budgets are so far out of line that you don't have any social workers to deal with communities that's living through trauma or homes that's in the midst of trauma. You need the kind of counseling to help navigate through that. That's what that movement is about. So as we move from protest to power to policy, we need to be strategic in doing that and not allow other people who are not in our interest to hijack a message and lead us in the wrong direction.
You know, Derrick Johnson, president of the NAACP, we're talking with live. This is a very exciting and enlightening conversation, because we have two civil rights giants. Dr. Chavis did sit in the same seat that Derrick Johnson is sitting in. But before I turn it back to you two civil rights heroes, let me just, I have to address this thing. We have publishers watching, and you know, sometimes as family, we hurt each other, right? And we have to do something to get past that. But Bobby Henry of the West Side Gazette writes in that he's wondering, and I know he's speaking for several publishers, why we were not invited to the meeting concerning the Black media. And he also mentions that evolving doesn't mean neglecting the foundation of the oldest voice, second only to the African drum. Before I turn it back over to you and Dr. Chavis, President Johnson, can you address that, please?
Absolutely. From the time I stepped into the office, one of the calls I made was to Dr. Chavis to say, hey, I'm here. You are one of my heroes. Whatever I am doing, whatever the association is doing, you are included. NNPA is included. And from that time forward, every time we had something, we made sure and did best efforts to include NNPA. But that also was at the neglect of NABJ. And I realized that, wait a minute, we got to right size this. And so as we was having a conversation, it wasn't to neglect anybody. It was trying to include a voice that we had not been actively including. and they have begun to say that, hey, we're not included. And so as we asked for the panel to be built out, and we're using Ed Gordon to build it out, he said, you know, this will be an interesting conversation. We have not talked to Black enterprise, and this is a historic moment, a sad moment, because with the loss of Earl Graves, and what are they doing? And we have not included NNBJ. What are they doing? And how do we pull this together to have a different kind of conversation? That's not being exclusive, because we've always included NNPA in what we do. But a partnership is a partnership, and just because there's a panel discussion and you on it one time, you may not be on the next time. That's not saying that the partnership is over. That is saying that we're trying to be comprehensive of all of the community, and we want to have a targeted conversation. Now, in retrospect, should NNPA be on the program? Probably so, because a lot of the conversation led to that. But it led to that because we are also looking at, wait a minute, how do we transition where we are as a community, how we're receiving our information? And with that, Black enterprise is very clear, like, listen, we're struggling. We've had to go to all digital, and this is why. We run a publication as well, Crisis. We got to go digital because we are getting to the place where it is becoming less relevant. Because if you're reporting on something quarterly, it is as stale as the day long, because news is happening so fast. It's happening hour by hour, 24 news hour cycles. And that's just the reality.
Right. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you, President Johnson, for your response to our beloved publisher, Bobby Henry, and the other publishers probably had those questions. But I just want to say on the record that since Derrick Johnson has been president and CEO of the NAACP, the relationship between the NAACP and NNPA has not been stronger. He has been an advocate. And we're working on now, and a lot of our publishers want to get additional advertising. And I just want to say publicly that Derrick Johnson is helping us open up doors to help sustain our newspapers, our media companies, and our digital companies by getting some of the major supporters of the NAACP to consider advertising with our newspapers. So our partnership is in place. I would caution anyone to rush to judgment on the NNPA or rush to judgment on the NAACP. We need both, and the stronger we work together, the more impact we will have. I just think, President Johnson, there's so much opportunity today. We need to take this moment where corporate America is trying to readdress itself. Everybody's trying to bridge the racial divide. I just believe that the extent to which the NAACP and the NNPA approach some of these companies together, it will be mutually beneficial to the communities in which we serve.
Yeah, absolutely. The concept of this and of scarcity and the scarcity mentality, we have to move beyond as a community, as organizations. And far too often we deal in that scarcity mentality approach. Being a part of the whole, also understand that parts would have to lead, parts will follow, other parts will lead the next time, others will follow. My goal, my job is to take a comprehensive approach, particularly when we have a corporate behemoth like Facebook, who's not in the best interest of any of us, able to dominate the space and advertise dollars in ways in which it neglects not only the content that's safe on that platform, but it neglects the opportunity for newspaper operators to exist. Your biggest threat in right now, and our biggest threat is not each other. It's behemoth companies like Facebook that's taking not only food off the table, but allowing for white supremacy and racial hate speech to exist on that platform and recruit members. So we need to focus on what's the commonality and not see each other as threats, when in fact we're not threats to one another. We should be looking at strategic alliances and approaches to benefit the whole community.
Absolutely.
And President Johnson, obviously this is a huge election year, but could you also talk about, because Mr. McConnell is up too, so can you also talk about that part of the election that I think a lot of people are not concentrating on?
So this year is probably one of the most important elections. We say that every election cycle, but all the indications tell us that our democracy is at threat. Our community could be completely wiped out if we don't get this right. whether it's Mitch McConnell, who's done an evil but masterful job of stacking the court. He cares little about what's coming out of the administration outside of making sure they get so many federal appointments, lifetime appointments to the court, that it would take us 20 to 30 years to come from under an onslaught of bad judicial opinions. But he's on the ballot this year, and we have an opportunity to address that, along with several individuals on the local level, the state and federal, local level. We have multiple district attorneys across the country who will be on the ballot this year. The district attorney that refused to bring charges against the individuals who killed Ahmaud Arbery, she's on the ballot this year. That's where our fight is. And if we can address that, we can start right-sizing community by community how the administration of justice is carried out for our people to ensure that police officers are held accountable. The reason why you have district attorneys like in Chicago with Kim Foxx or across the country under attack, because they begin to say we're aligned with the community, not the police department. On the ballot this year are several legislative bodies. Those legislative bodies will determine not only the allocation of resources, but some states are seeking to amend the Constitution, open up a constitutional convention. We got to stop that. We have, I think, my last check, about 28 states who signed on to call for a constitutional convention. If they get 2/3, we got a problem because it's opened up the door of rewriting much of the Constitution or amending it. That will be a direct impact on our ability to navigate in this society. We have to stop that onslaught. We know what Congress makeup will look like and what it could look like if this administration get back in office. That's our focus. And for the NAACP, we've done the data analysis. We're looking at 11 states where we can impact 190 electoral votes, where we can become the difference in the outcome of multiple legislative seats, both state Senate and House seats, and congressional seats, federal congressional seats. That data analysis tells us that in these 11 states, here are the exact places we need to operate, and in those operate, here are the exact people we need to move the needle. And if we move the needle with these infrequent voters by 1 to 3%, we can impact the outcome. And we don't have to tell people how to vote, because as a people, our collective consciousness, as Naacp would say, would drive us to the place where we need to be.
Absolutely. Dr. Chavis?
Yes. Well, I agree, and I think that those 11 states that you have designated, President Johnson, we want to work with you. We have newspapers in all those 11 states. Jim Clyburn put it this way: the 2020 election is the most consequential election of our lifetime. Every election is important, but this is the most consequential. What the outcome of this election is going to determine the quality of life of Black America. It's going to determine the future of the United States of America. And to a large extent, it's going to determine the future of the world. So we can't afford to have anybody sleeping, not voting, not registering. We need a record Black voter turnout in all those 11 states, and every state, every community, local, state, regional, and federal elections. We got to weigh in with the heaviest hand that we've ever had.
Yeah, and to that point, Dr. Chavis, President Johnson, David Youngblood, one of our viewers, has asked. He's asking. He says there's an ongoing insistence on a Black female vice president choice, and he fully supports that. But should we also, and finally, ask for the money, Secretary of Treasury?
You know, if you only get what you ask for. If you don't ask for it, you definitely won't get it. We need to push as hard as possible to ensure we have the right people in place to address the structural and institutional racism that has impeded our growth as a community. So it's across the board, but I love Zernell Houston's statement that all of our skinfolk ain't our kinfolk. So I'm always cautious when we say we want a Black person, because there is an art and a science of people outside of our community being able to pick the right Negro that look the part but won't do the part. So I'm less concerned about that and more concerned with what's the substance of the change the person that's going to bring. And if we can get the type of people who's going to walk in the door and they're going to bring us the substantive changes that's required for us to address structural and institutional racism, That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and without asking you to endorse a specific vice presidential candidate, are there some, or at least a couple out there that the NAACP is looking at as perhaps the best candidate?
So
And
my response
what
to that,
criteria
yeah.
would that be?
So my response to that question has been consistent because we're nonpartisan. We don't endorse candidates or political parties. I can say all the names I've heard is more qualified than the guy that's serving in the White House right now.
That's a good answer, President Johnson. So, since this year as well, I know we only have you for a short time, but I wanted you to talk about the importance of the census as it pertains to Black people.
Critically important. You know, I use the historical analogy. It ain't even an analogy; it's a reality. That during the Constitutional Convention, one of the major debates was the counting of people, and the Southern states wanted to be able to count Africans who were in the system of slavery, but without providing them a representation. And the reason why they wanted that is because they understood, based on the structure in that negotiation, that the allocation of the resources will be based on the head count. And if they can count people and yet deny them access to exercise their franchise, they can get more benefit compared to the northern states. And in the deal that was cut, the compromise, that's where we get this concept of 3/5 a person. It wasn't anything dealing with who we were as an individual or our lives that really matter. It was about money. The census is about money. A complete count, particularly for our communities, could ensure the allocation of federal resources in the areas where we live geographically for the roads, the streets, the bridges, the education, the support for our seniors, so on and so forth. It's about federal allocation. And based on formulas that are built in, that determines how much money go to a particular area. So if you live in a geography that's majority Black or largely African American, you want to make sure there's a complete count because as we elect people to govern, we want to make sure they have the resources they can govern with. The worst thing can happen is we finally get control of a urban area, a municipal government or a county government, and we walk in the door and the tax coffers are depleted because they've undervalued our property and the allocation of federal resources are suffocated because we've been undercounted and we've done it to ourselves.
Yeah, and President Johnson, Ernest Coverson is asking a question too that I think is it's an important question because our founders at Freedom's Journal said we wish to plead our own cause. For too long, others have spoken for us. But Ernest Coverson asks, how do we utilize Black newspapers as the major outlet, or Black news, Black-owned media? I'm going to paraphrase them a little bit because going back to your point, most of our publishers, if not all by now, have gone digital as well as still printing the print product. But how do we utilize the Black press as the major outlet for Black news? Again, we see the Washington Post, we see others pilfering now the Black press. They're looking for Black journalists.
But I think is it the business model? It is how do the Black press stand up at this moment to stand head and shoulder as a deliverer of information for our community? You got to flip that on its head to make sure that we're penetrating. The Washington Post is only as effective as its readership, and they become effective with readership because they've completely flipped their business model on their head. If you walk in the office of the Washington Post, it is a shell in terms of employees of what it used to be. You walk into the newsroom of any paper across the country, in many cases, the staffing is about a third of what it used to be. So they've been able to do more in terms of penetrating into in communities with less people. It's a business model proposition. And that's kind of what was a conversation on that panel. We have to figure out how to shift our business model to identify the target demographics, understand how are they consuming information, get into that marketplace and compete. It's not a content question because the Black press, once properly situated, you're going to get all of the best content. It is a business model of how you penetrate to the into the readerships that make up our community. A young woman, 30 years old, Morgan DeBond, when she set up Blavity, it is all based on a business model that's driven by data. And I think there's a lot can be learned with how she's flipped that business model. Here's a young sister who's been studying the business model of how to penetrate our community using data. I think NNPA and the Black press can learn something from her because she comes out of that tech world and she understands that tech world. Far too many of our successful papers are beginning to rely on events as opposed to news. And that's a business model that generates revenue. But what happens in the event of a public health pandemic like we're in? You can't hold the event anymore. That's going to impact Essence because Essence is generating tons of money from the Essence Fest to support the publication. And I think Hiram is doing the same thing with real-time media. He has some great events to support the publication. But how do we get into the digital game and begin to aggregate the digital so we can micro-target our community as we deliver the content?
Well,
I'm struggling through that now with the Crisis Magazine, quite frankly. I'm not talking from afar and looking down. I'm down trying to figure out how we all get up out of this. And I'm looking at different models.
Well, President Johnson, we certainly invite the NAACP, I'm sure Dr. Chavis has extended that invitation, and all your members to sign up, register, I should say, for the NNPA's 80th convention. This time it's the first time in the NNPA's history as virtual, and it's totally free. So I believe the website is virtualnnpa2020.com. We invite you, President Johnson, and all to sign up. Dr. Chavis, he's been having some technical difficulties there, but he's been working around the clock for the last couple of months with the COVID and everything else. So we have to excuse the bad connection that he had this morning. It certainly would have been a very exciting conversation to see you and Dr. Chavis discuss the issues of the day. Perhaps we'll do that again real soon. But we really thank you, President Johnson, for taking out the time this morning. And we look forward to more from the NAACP. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, stay well. Thank you, President Johnson.
Thank you. And I look forward to the next opportunity. Take care, Doc.
Thank you. Take care.